please come on in and find yourself a comfortable seat as we embark on another exploration of Sir Terry Pratchett's Discworld. The drum here, the mended drum that is our base camp, as it were, for these weekly explorations, which can take us anywhere on the disc and lots of other places as well. We hope you find the next 45 or so minutes entertaining and instructive, as Edward Gibbon liked to say. 45 or so minutes exploring the spaces and places and meeting the faces and the races of that world and mirror of worlds, that disc-shaped improbability which rides through space on the back of four enormous elephants which are themselves perched on the carapace of the 10,000-mile-long world turtle, the great Atuin, that world that exists only because every probability curve must have its far end, and let's face it, because the gods enjoy a good joke as well as the rest of us. A world which continues to exist only because it is permeated with magic. A world, in short, which bears absolutely no resemblance whatsoever to our round world. But you knew that. Please be sure and check out this week's show notes for links to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, our pod page, and our Podchaser page, as well as other important and enlightening stuff. So do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit to the Discworld. Salve, which is foreign for water. And I hope you've got a comfy seat and a beverage of your choice, because here we go. First of all, the Ultimate Discworld Companion just came out. Got an electronic copy of it. There are no physical hard copies available yet. And it's nice to be able to do something like that. And I want to thank those of you who have tossed a few bucks in the direction of Medieval Gnome Productions via the Buy Me a Coffee app on our pod page. It doesn't take much outlay for the individual listener when enough of you do it to allow us to afford a new book like that. So thank you to all of you who have done that for us. Now, this Ultimate Discworld Companion is coming out 24 years after the first one, the original one did. And then in between those is Turtle Recall. The best part of this one so far is the biographies of Paul Kidby, Stephen Briggs, and Sir Terry that are included in the book. And I know that personally I have reached the point of no return, because I have started annotating the Ultimate Discworld Companion. Other thing I've been doing is rereading Mort in preparation for next week's Pratt Chips. And Mort is just the fourth book in the series, so it's early days. It's been a while since I've read it. And I am keeping my stack of little sticky notes, the ones that are shaped like little tiny bookmarks, handy, and using a lot of them. I like them because you can actually write a little note on them, and that makes it a little easier to see what you have bookmarked when you go back to the book later, sometimes much later. But I noticed some remarkable things this time through. First of all, did you know that Death smokes a pipe? There is a brief scene in Mort after they have stopped for some curry where Death lights up his pipe. And we never see Death smoking a pipe or anything else thereafter. Mort also contains the first reference to the sunken continent of Leshp, as far as I know, and I don't believe that it is ever referred to again until Jingo And in there is also the first use of a convention, which Sir Terry doesn't come back to until the truth. And that is the --ing. The three dashes, we are assured, in the truth being pronounced as a pause, as in, I hate ing wizards, for example. That's an actual line from Mort, spoken by one of three thieves that are trying to rob him, and it is immediately followed by the only use of that pause as a verb. It's never used that way in the truth. First thief says, I hate ing wizards, and the second thief says, well, why do you them then? Even though it's by innuendo, it is the crudest piece of dialogue that he ever included, and it is never repeated, which is probably a very good thing. But the most interesting tidbit I picked up concerns that favorite obsession of some, the mythological Discworld chronology. I've spoken before about the fact that you cannot really hope to do that very accurately because time gets all broken up and stitched back together in odd ways, as we know through the events of a couple of the Discworld books. Nevertheless, it is fun when you get a clue to try to piece it in, fit it in with the other pieces. And in Mort, Death is kind of wandering around because he's got some time off, and he ends up at a party celebrating the 10th anniversary of the patricians assuming of that position. And, that didn't come out right, did it? Anyway, 10th anniversary of the patricians' rise to power, and if we assume that that patrician is Vetinari, then we get some interesting things going on. We know that Mort and Isabel have one child, and that they are married at the end of the events of Mort. That child, of course, is Susan Still Healet, and she is 16 years old when we first encounter her in soul music. So if you assume that at the end of Mort, we have a year between the wedding and the birth of Susan, and then 16 years for her to get to that age when she is attending the Quorum College for Young Ladies. So we have a total of 27 years between the patricians' accession to power and soul music. We also know that the events of Night Watch took place about 30 years before the present. And so triangulating that, we go back 30 years to when Snapcase ceased to be the patrician, and Lord Winder, who became known as homicidal Lord Winder, acceded to the position. We know that Vetinari assassinated Snapcase, or scared him to death, more precisely. And we now know, thanks to this bit of triangulation with Mort and Soul Music and Night Watch, that Winder must have been patrician about 3 years. And that begs the question of how he was removed from office. He is remembered as homicidal Lord Winder, so he obviously was not a popular patrician, but you have to assume that it's most likely that he was removed from office through assassination. And we know now that Havelock Vetinari became patrician upon Lord Winder's putative assassination. So that, of course, begs the question of whether Vetinari carried out the inhumation of Lord Winder. Now, my guess would be that he did not. The way the assassins work, if it had been decided that Vetinari was going to be the next patrician, then yes, obviously someone would have been hired to inhume Lord Winder. But at one point it is said that the Vetinari family is one of the most rich and powerful in Ankh-Morpork, so they easily could have hired an assassin to take care of this and get Vetinari into the patricianship. The interesting thing about Vetinari being a member of one of the richest and most powerful families in Ankh-Morpork is that there is no mention made of family anywhere else in the Discworld books. Now, in Night Watch, Vetinari is still a student assassin, and we know at that point that he has an aunt, American pronunciation, or an aunt, Lady Roberta Messerol, but that's it. And so that leaves you wondering, what about his other family members? You certainly get the impression that he doesn't have any family members. He is a very solitary sort of force, but you would guess that he would have to somewhere, because otherwise he would be the last of the Vetinaris, which may be the case, but we're not told either way. One of these days, perhaps we can speak with Saccharissa Cripslock of the Times and see if she can shed any light on that for us. But for now, we will have to be satisfied with not knowing. But right now, we are going to get to know Jason Ogg better in this week's Short and Sweet Biography. The Short and Sweet Biography is a new feature of Tales from the Drum, and last week you got a twofer. You got a short and sweet biography of yours truly, the Medieval Gnome, followed by short and sweet biography of Angua von Uberwald. We have to go back to mine for just a moment for a quick correction. Last week I said I was the manager for a facility for the homeless, and that isn't correct. I was a case manager for that facility. So now onward to this week's short and sweet biography. We are featuring Jason Ogg this week. Jason is the eldest living child of Nanny Ogg, the others being Graham, Tracy, Cheryl, Daff, Dreen, Nev, Trev, Kev, Wayne, Charlene, Darren, Karen, Reet, and the baby Sean. Like Captain Carrot, Jason is a very large and muscular man, and also like Captain Carrot, a lot of people make the mistake of assuming that Jason is slow in Jason's case because he doesn't say much. He does a lot. He is the smith of Lancre, and that is not like the smith of Scroat. Jason is the smith of Lancre. Kind of resembles a male witch in some ways. He knows things that other people don't know, particularly the horseman's word. He works with iron. He also breaks up bar fights by picking up one contestant in each hand and banging them together if necessary. And he's a leading member of the Lancre Morris men, for whom he plays the fiddle. It is as the Smith of Lancre, however, that Jason is most widely known. He has a long-term contract, if you will. The Smith of Lancre has a contract with the universe. He can shoe anything. And that means that when anything shows up, he has to shoe it. He also has a long-term contract with death. He shoes Binky. He's never seen death because, as all smiths before him in Lancre, he shoes death's horse blindfolded. And one time, once the shoeing is done, he gets up the courage to ask Death what he would see if he took the blindfold off. And Death replies, Jason Ogg, what do you believe in? Jason thinks it over, breaks into a cold sweat, and says, well, sir, right now, I believe in this blindfold. And Death says, good man. Since he can shoe anything, some of the local boys once brought him an ant to shoe as a joke. And Jason did indeed stay up with magnifying glass, little tiny tools, and he shoed that ant, and the ant can still be heard clattering around on the floor of the forge. The other extremely unusual shoeing job that we know of came at the behest of Granny Weatherwax, who had him shoe a unicorn with silver shoes. The unicorn was a pet of the Queen of the Elves, and it had broken into the Discworld, and Granny wanted to make sure that the Queen never got her pet back. Hence the silver shoes. And, coincidentally, hence the even further enhancement to Jason's reputation as a blacksmith. And I think between his status as a blacksmith and his status as Nanny Ogg's eldest child, Jason Ogg is one of the most well-respected men in Lancre, and in the Ramtops, for that matter. So there you have this week's short and sweet biography of Jason Ogg, blacksmith of Lancre. I'd like to take a few more minutes now to talk about stories and tales. Last week spoke a little bit about tale just being a more resonant word for story, and this show is certainly all about stories, and in a larger sense, we're going to be talking a lot this season about story and the power of story and the need for story in our lives as individuals and as a culture. And that is because we're going to be taking a good amount of time to look at the 4 books in the series, The Science of Discworld. And they end up talking a lot about story. When we get into the Science of Discworld part of the show in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking about Rincewind, and especially in his role of egregious professor of cruel and unusual geography. That's a position that he was appointed to when the Wizards were on Mono Island. And I wanted to check on the wording of that title, so I went to this new Ultimate Discworld Companion. It's got a paragraph about the various job titles that Rincewind holds at UU. And this is kind of fun to contemplate what Rincewind has always sought is some secure, safe position somewhere, and seemed to get this when he was appointed as egregious professor of cruel and unusual geography, even though the previous incumbent was probably eaten by a giant lizard. The post has no salary and total insecurity of tenure, but he does get his laundry done for free, a place at mealtimes, and, because of a quirk of the coal porter, 7 buckets full of coal every day. He also gets his own superheated office, and no one chases him much. Despite the fact that he is the least senior member of the UU faculty, he is also now chair of experimental serendipity, reader in slewed dynamics, fretwork teacher, chair for the public misunderstanding of magic, professor of virtual anthropology, and lecturer in approximate accuracy. He has, in fact, accumulated all those jobs that require absolutely nothing more than that someone, in theory, is doing them. And that reminds me that one of these days I have to run down that definition of slewed. You know, there's one out there somewhere. Right now I want to take a couple of minutes to acknowledge our sponsors. The Mended Drum, of course, is the host for our weekly gatherings. The Drum is now considered to be the most reputable, disreputable tavern in town. And you don't want to miss the choreographed bar fights on Friday and Saturday nights. Think of a combination of professional wrestling and professional skating, and that may begin to give you an idea of the Mended Drums choreographed bar fights, but it is said that they must be seen to be believed. And finally, I want to take a minute to remind you of the best quantity eatery in town, and that is Harga's House of Ribs down by the docks. Harga's, where the pan fat might be older than you. But now, back to the business at hand. And we are back, and before we get into the Science of Discworld segment of this week's episode, quickly just want to make not a correction, but another estimation. Last week I talked about how prolific Sir Terry was, and I did it in terms of how many words, and came up with the figure of 4.5 million words written in his published works. I used 60 books as a convenient approximation, and this is another approximation using 60 books as n, and it is predicated on the notion that there are 100,000 words in the average book. So you take 100,000 times 60, and you get the number 6 million, which is 33% more than our estimate of last week. It's a lot of words. That is really what it comes down to. The words in the Science of Discworld were written by Sir Terry with Ian Stewart and Jack Cohen. And we all know who Sir Terry is. Ian Stewart is a Fellow of the Royal Society, a Professor of Mathematics at the University of Warwick, and the author of numerous books on math and popular science, as well as science fiction novels co-authored with Jack Cohen. Jack Cohen is a professor of biology, an honorary professor of mathematics at the University of Warwick, and has co-authored several books with Ian Stewart. So Cohen and Stewart done a lot of work together before they hooked up with Sir Terry for the Science of Discworld series. Last week we heard about the Round World project and how it was remarkably completed in 10 seconds, when it was widely believed that it would take months to do so, which is why the wizards had never bothered with it. But in the unusual situation created by the thalamic pile in the disused squash court, creating incredible amounts of magic, suddenly there was motivation, and then suddenly there was the Round World. Now, the wizards learn more about Round World every day, and this is largely because of Hex. Hex is able to observe conditions on the Round World very closely. He determines that for every day that passes at UU, millions of days will have passed on this Round World. And most importantly, he devises a way to send a virtual copy of, say, a wizard to the Round World project to make closer observations. To no one's surprise, Rincewind is selected, and despite his best efforts to beg off / run away, he ends up getting into the virtual reality suit that Hex has created and going to visit the Round World, where he finds for a long time a whole bunch of nothing, because we are in the very early days, early eons of the Earth's development. But finally there appears muck, there appears slime, there appears, in other words, life on the Round World. And before long there also appears on the Round World the luggage. not a virtual copy of the luggage, but the luggage itself, because the luggage has decided that its owner is on the round world, not understanding the concept of a virtual copy, and so it goes to the round world in search of Rincewind. Now, the wizards are going to make use of this because they can send the luggage back and forth, and the luggage can take things to the round world and bring things from the round world. In short, the wizards very quickly begin to meddle with the round world. Now, I need to step back for a moment and talk about the structure of the Science of Discworld books, as well as the purpose. The structure of the books is alternating chapters. One chapter is set on the disc at Unseen University and is obviously a work of fiction. The next chapter then is a chapter about round world science, and very much it is not a work of fiction. And by interweaving these two kinds of chapters and playing the one off the other, it's not like they're hermetically sealed off from each other. They very much play one off the other in an attempt, a really impressive attempt, in fact, to explain science, and in fact to explain enough science, well enough that a reader, having completed all 4 books, will be orders of magnitude more literate about science than the average person. Of course, that isn't difficult, and Cohen and Stewart acknowledge that. It is not difficult to best the level of science literacy of the average person. And Cohen and Stewart really tackle this issue head on. They really start with this issue. How do you teach science? How do you present science in such a way that the average person can understand it? And they make a pretty good argument that it is possible to do so, and then they proceed to do so in the 4 Science of Discworld books. But let's go to the first chapter that Cohen and Stewart have written, and chapter that is the basis for the round world teaching, learning, and understanding of science part of this series, because they are talking about science and magic and have come to a point where they're saying that there are kinds of magic, if you will, that are extant in our world today. And they're using Arthur C. Clarke's concept that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But as I said, they're now talking about a special kind of magic. A special kind of magic is one of the many things that have made humans what they are. And this special kind of magic is called education. It's how we pass on ideas from one generation to the next. If we were like computers, we'd be able to copy our minds into our children so that they would grow up agreeing with every opinion that we hold dear. Well, actually they wouldn't, though they might start out that way. There is an aspect of education that we want to draw to your attention. We call it lies to children. We're aware that some readers may object to the word lie. It got Ian and Jack into terrible trouble with some literally minded Swedes at a scientific conference who took it all terribly seriously and spent several days protesting that it's not a lie. Well, it is. It is for the best possible reasons, but it's still a lie. A lie to children is a statement that is false, but which nevertheless leads the child's mind towards a more accurate explanation, one that the child will only be able to appreciate if it has been primed with the lie. The early stages of education have to include a lot of lies to children because early explanations have to be simple. However, we live in a complex world, and lies to children must eventually be replaced by more complex stories if they're not to become delayed action genuine lies. Unfortunately, what most of us know about science consists of vaguely remembered lies to children. For example, the rainbow. We all remember being told at school that glass and water split light into its constituent colors. There's even a nice experiment where you can see them. And we were told that this is how rainbows form from light passing through raindrops. When we were children, it never occurred to us that while this explains the colors of the rainbow, it doesn't explain the shape. Neither does it explain how the light from the many different raindrops in a thundershower somehow combines to create a bright arc. Why doesn't it all smudge out? This is not the place to tell you about the elegant geometry of the rainbow, but you can see why lie is not such a strong word after all. The school explanation diverts our attention from the real marvel of the rainbow, the cooperative effects of all the raindrops, by trying to pretend that once you explain the colors, that's it. Other examples of lies to children are the idea that the Earth's magnetic field is like a huge bar magnet with N and S marked on it. The picture of an atom is a miniature solar system. The idea that living amoeba is a billion-year-old primitive organism. The image of DNA is the blueprint for a living creature. And the connection between relativity and Einstein's hairstyle. It's the sort of crazy idea that only people with hair like that can come up with. Quantum mechanics lacks a public icon of this kind. It doesn't tell a simple story that a non-specialist can grab and hang on to. So we feel uncomfortable about it. But when you live in a complex world, you have to simplify it in order to understand it. Indeed, that's what understand means. At different stages of education, different levels of simplification are appropriate. Liar to children is an honorable and vital profession, otherwise known as teacher. But what teaching does not do, although many politicians think it does, which is one of the problems, is erect a timeless edifice of facts, quote unquote. Footnote. As humans, we have invented lots of useful kinds of lie, as well as lies to children, as much as they can understand. There are lies to bosses, as much as they need to know. Lies to patients. They won't worry about what they don't know. And, for all sorts of reasons, lies to ourselves. Lies to children is simply a prevalent and necessarily kind of lie. Universities are very familiar with bright, qualified school leavers who arrive and then go into shock on finding that biology or physics isn't quite what they've been taught so far. Yes, but you needed to understand that, they are told, so that now we can tell you why it isn't exactly true. Discworld teachers know this and use it to demonstrate why universities are truly storehouses of knowledge. Students arrive from school confident that they know nearly everything, and they leave years later certain that they know practically nothing. Where did the knowledge go in the meantime? Into the university, of course, where it is carefully dried and stored. End footnote. Every so often, you have to unlearn what you thought you already knew and replace it by something more subtle. This process is what science is all about, and it never stops. It means that you shouldn't take everything we say as gospel either, for we belong to another equally honorable profession, liar to readers. And that concept creates a really powerful framework for the Science of Discworld series. Because Cohen and Stewart are nothing if not ambitious, what they attempt to do in this 4-book series with Sir Terry's assistance in giving the fictional counterpoint from the Discworld perspective is give readers an understanding of, an appreciation of science that is several levels ahead of the lies to children understanding. And they do start with the Big Bang. Remember Sir Terry's classic line, the opening line of Lords and Ladies. In the beginning, there was nothing, which exploded. But just in the first volume of this series, these guys go from the Big Bang to the time in which an intelligent species builds a series of space elevators around the equator of the planet and leaves the planet because they realize that every intelligent civilization before them, and there have been numerous of those, has been destroyed by some natural disaster, leaving only the barest of traces. But again, as I said, the amount of time that passes in the Round World Project during a Discworld day at UU is millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years. So if the wizards aren't sitting there watching closely all the time, or if they don't have Rincewind virtually on the ground all the time, which they do not, because so much of the time it's so boring that there is no point in it. But they do see, for example, an intelligent crab civilization. And at this point they are interfering pretty heartily, I guess we can say. But the intelligent crab civilization gets wiped out by a comet. And the wizards do completely then lose interest because every time something good is happening, something bad happens and wipes out the whole civilization. So what's the point? And the last civilization, or proto-civilization here, that the wizards are paying any attention to is a group of apes. But they have become so disillusioned that they think they know how it's going to end and they don't want to pay any attention to it. So time passes without anyone paying any attention to it. But then somebody notices that something strange has happened. And the strange thing that has happened, it turns out, again, is these space elevators built in an equatorial fashion. And whatever civilization it was that built them has used them to depart the Earth. The Earth is abandoned, in fact. And there is no one that the wizards can talk to explain exactly what this is all about and exactly what happened. But they do decide that it couldn't have been that ape proto-civilization that they were watching that accomplished this. There had to be some kind of unusually rapid evolution somewhere to bring a civilization, an intelligent species, to the point where they could do this. The wizards don't realize that the apes, of course, became the men and women, the humans, that built the space elevator. And so, utterly bored with the Round World Project, they assign it to, they give the actual artifact to Rincewind to take and store on a shelf in his room somewhere with all of his rock samples and so on. But while the wizards may be finished with the Round World is not finished with the wizards. And we will find out how that shakes out, begin to find out anyway, in next week's Science of Discworld section. And remember, you can find Tales from the Drum on Facebook, so please stop by and visit us there. Leave us a note, give us a like, that would be great. We also have a YouTube channel where you can find our regular weekly episodes and compilations of our Pratt Chips episodes. both with some extra goodies, generally with some footage of our staff, although there are some other things in the work. We also have a pod page website, which is kind of like one-stop shopping, if you please. You can find all the episodes of The Drum there. You can find our blog, and you can also find some ways to donate to Medieval Gnome Productions. You can also go to the Podchaser website to rate and review The Drum, and that is a great place to do that because Podchaser is a listing of all podcasts, or at least a very great number of them, and it's the first place that a lot of people are likely to encounter Tales from the Drum. So some good ratings and reviews there really help to bring some new listeners to the table, as it were. As Medieval Gnome Productions, we produce both Tales from the Drum and The Gem Show. And Medieval Gnome Productions is our dowdy little engineer, Ivy Munchkin McDoodles, our media consultant, Artemis, our chief executive feline, Holly Golightly, and me, your host, and all-around nice guy, the Medieval Gnome. As always, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, be well, stay safe, remain hopeful, keep committing those random acts of kindness, read some Pratchett, and mind how you go. This episode of Tales from the Drum is copyright 2021 by Medieval Gnome Productions.
Okay, here is our Siamese cat. One head is bathing the other head, and as you can see, the other head is waking up now. So now, but you can see how they are joined together, connected, back to front. And the smaller head is, as I said, bathing the larger head. We call the smaller head Ivy and the larger head Holly.